I've told this story to maybe 3 people in my life, and even now saying it out loud makes me feel stupid. Not because I think I imagined it. I know what I heard that night. I know somebody was inside that Airbnb with me. What messes with me is that nothing about the situation fully made sense. I still don't know if the guy I saw that night was actually supposed to be there. That's the part that bothers me the most. Not the blood on the bathroom floor. Not the sound I heard outside the bedroom at around 3 in the morning. Not even the fact that somebody used a key to get into the Airbnb while I was inside. It's the uncertainty. Because when I called the owner afterward and described him, there was this long silence on the phone before she finally asked me a question that genuinely made my stomach drop. She said, "Are you sure he was real?" This happened about 2 years ago when I was driving across northern Arizona for work. At the time, I was doing freelance audio installation jobs. Mostly boring stuff. Restaurants, offices, retail stores. I'd travel wherever the contract was, stay for a few days, finish the setup, then head home. That month had been especially busy because a company I'd worked with before had recommended me. I was taking almost every job I could get because the money was good and I was trying to save up to move out of my apartment. The Airbnb was supposed to be nothing more than a cheap place to sleep for one night. That's all. I had just finished a job in Flagstaff and needed to drive out toward Holbrook the next morning for another installation at a small roadside diner. The drive was longer than I expected because of construction, and by the time I realized how exhausted I was, it was already after midnight. I remember stopping at a gas station somewhere outside Winslow and sitting in my car for maybe 10 minutes, just trying to decide whether I should keep driving. I was exhausted, not tired in the normal sense. I mean genuinely drained. My eyes were burning from staring at the road for hours. I'd had too much coffee, not enough food, and I was getting that weird detached feeling you get after driving late at night for too long. The kind where you stop processing time correctly. I pulled out my phone and started looking for hotels nearby, but everything was either fully booked or ridiculously expensive. Then I found this Airbnb. It was a small guest house behind somebody's property, about 15 minutes off the highway. Cheap, available immediately, self-check-in. The pictures looked normal enough. Tiny living room, small kitchen, 1 bedroom, kind of old-fashioned interior, wood panel walls, floral curtains, nothing special. The reviews were decent too. Most of them mentioned how quiet the area was. One review said something like, "Perfect place to disconnect." At the time, that sounded great. I booked it immediately. A few seconds later, the host sent me a long, automated message with instructions. There was a lockbox beside the front door, key inside, Wi-Fi password, parking instructions, and one line near the bottom that I didn't think much about until later. If you hear noises outside at night, please ignore them. Wildlife is common in this area. At the time, I assumed they meant coyotes or something. The drive out there was darker than I expected. Once I left the highway, there were almost no streetlights, just long stretches of empty road and occasional houses sitting far back from the pavement. I remember checking my GPS every 30 seconds because I kept thinking I missed the turn. Eventually, I found the road. It was this narrow gravel lane lined with dead-looking trees. The Airbnb property sat at the very end. The main house was larger than I expected, single story. Old. Most of the lights were off, except for one dim yellow porch light near the garage. The guest house sat behind it, maybe 30 feet away. It looked exactly like the pictures. Small rectangular building with faded green paint and a tiny wooden porch. No other cars around. No movement. Completely silent. I parked beside the guest house and just sat there for a second, listening to my engine tick as it cooled. The silence out there felt strange. Not peaceful like the middle of nowhere usually feels, more like when you walk into a room right after an argument and can tell something happened before you got there. Not peaceful, heavy, like the kind of silence where every little sound suddenly feels amplified. When I got out of the car, the gravel under my shoes sounded unbelievably loud, and I grabbed my backpack, found the lockbox, entered the code, and got the key. The moment I unlocked the door, I noticed the smell. Not terrible, just old, like dust and damp wood. The inside was warmer than outside, which surprised me because the place looked like it hadn't been occupied in weeks. There was a lamp on in the living room. That was it. No TV running, no music, nothing. I locked the door behind me automatically. The place itself was small enough that you could see almost everything from the entrance. Tiny couch, kitchenette, hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. There were a lot of framed photos on the walls, mostly landscapes, a few black and white family pictures. One of them caught my attention because it looked unusually old, maybe from the 70s. 3 people standing outside the same guest house, a woman, a younger guy, and another man whose face was partially cut off by the edge of the frame. I don't know why I remember that picture specifically. I think it's because later that night, I became weirdly convinced I'd seen that same man somewhere else. At the time, though, I barely paid attention. I was too tired. I checked the bedroom first. Small bed, cheap dresser, one window facing the back trees. The bathroom looked clean enough. The shower curtain was pulled halfway closed. I remember sliding it aside, just out of habit, because I always check hotel bathrooms. Nothing there. Then I plugged my phone in, took off my shoes, and lay down for a minute. That's when I heard the first noise. It sounded like footsteps outside. Very faint, crunching gravel. I sat up immediately. The sound stopped. I stayed still for maybe 15 seconds listening. Nothing. I figured it was probably an animal, or maybe the owners walking around the property. Still, I got up and checked the window. Couldn't see much. And the faint outline of trees. No movement. That should have been the end of it. But after that, I became aware of how isolated the place actually was. No nearby houses. No traffic sounds. No distant city noise. Just complete emptiness. And once that realization settled in, every little sound started standing out. The old wood creaking, wind brushing the outside wall, something tapping lightly against the roof. I told myself I was just overtired. I washed my face, changed clothes, and got back into bed. I remember checking Instagram for a few minutes, just trying to make myself tired enough to pass out. My eyes kept drifting shut. Then around maybe 1 a.m, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message simply said, "You checked in late." No punctuation. No name. At first I thought it might have been the host, but the Airbnb app already had all our communication. Why text me directly? I checked the booking profile. No number matching it. I remember typing, "Who is this?" No response. I waited maybe 30 seconds. Still nothing. Then another message came through. "And don't go outside tonight." I actually laughed a little when I read it. Not because it was funny, because it felt like somebody messing with me. Maybe teenagers. Maybe the owner's kids. Something stupid. Still, I locked the bedroom door after that. I don't even know why. The guest house already had a locked front door, but suddenly having that second lock made me feel better. I turned off the lamp and tried to sleep. For a while, everything stayed quiet. I was drifting in and out when I heard what sounded like metal rattling outside. Very soft, like somebody touching the lockbox. I opened my eyes immediately. The room was completely dark, except for the faint blue light from my phone charger. I held my breath, listening. The sound came again. Tiny metallic clicks. Then silence. Then footsteps. Slow footsteps moving across the gravel. I sat up. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I kept staring at the bedroom door, expecting something to happen. Nothing did. After maybe a minute, the footsteps faded away. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 1:43 a.m. I almost called the host right then, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. And honestly, part of me still believed there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe another guest, maybe maintenance. Maybe I was mishearing things because I was exhausted. So I stayed in bed. At some point, I eventually fell asleep. I don't know how long I was out before the noise woke me again. This time it was louder. A door closing. Not the bedroom door. The front door. I froze immediately. There was a pause. Then a sound that I will never forget. Keys? Metal keys lightly clinking together. Inside the house, I sat perfectly still. Every muscle in my body locked up. Then I heard movement in the living room. Slow footsteps, not sneaking exactly. Just calm, casual, like whoever it was believed they were alone. I remember staring at the crack beneath the bedroom door, waiting to see shadows. At first there was nothing. Then a faint shape crossed the hallway. My mouth went completely dry. Somebody was inside. I grabbed my phone and opened the Airbnb app as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly, I kept mistyping. I sent the host a message. "There's someone in the guest house." No response. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the kitchen. Then I heard drawers opening, one after another. Slowly, I remember thinking maybe the owner forgot something and entered without realizing a guest was there. But if that was true, why not announce themselves? Why walk around in silence? Then came another sound. A low cough. Mela. Older. Close. Right outside the bedroom. I stopped breathing. The bedroom doorknob moved slightly. That tiny movement scared me more than if somebody had started pounding on the door, because whoever was out there was being careful just once. A tiny metallic shift. Then stillness. I stared at it so hard. My eyes started watering. A few seconds later, the knob turned again, slower this time. The person on the other side realized the door was locked. I heard nothing for maybe 10 seconds, then 3 soft knocks, not aggressive, almost polite. I didn't answer. Another knock, then a man's voice. Quiet. Wrong room. That was it. Just those 2 words, then footsteps moving away. I stayed frozen for at least another minute. Then I heard the front door open. Close. Silence again. I waited another 5 minutes. Before finally getting out of bed, I picked up the heavy lamp from the nightstand and slowly unlocked the bedroom door. The living room was empty, but things had definitely been moved. Kitchen drawers open, one cabinet hanging slightly ajar, and the front door deadbolt unlocked. I know for a fact I locked it. I checked every room. Nobody there. I looked outside through the window. Nothing. No car. No lights. Just darkness. That's when the Airbnb host finally responded. The message read, "No one should be there." I immediately called her. She answered, sounding half asleep. I explained everything. The footsteps. The person inside. The voice. There was this long pause. Then she asked if I was sure it wasn't one of the neighbors. I remember getting irritated because who walks into somebody else's rental in the middle of the night? I asked if anyone else had a key. She hesitated, then said the previous property owner might still have an old copy. Apparently she'd bought the place less than a year earlier. The old owner had lived there for decades before moving into assisted care after some kind of mental decline. She said his son occasionally came by to collect remaining belongings from storage sheds behind the property. I asked if the son was older. She said yes. Then she told me something strange. The son wasn't supposed to be there anymore. According to her, he'd stopped visiting months earlier after some kind of argument over the estate. I asked if she could call him. She said she didn't actually have his number. That didn't make me feel any better. She apologized repeatedly and offered to refund the stay. I told her I wasn't worried about the money. I wanted to know if someone was still on the property. She said she lived over an hour away and couldn't come check until morning. At that point, I considered leaving. I really did, but I was exhausted. It was almost 3 a.m, and the nearest hotel was far away. Plus, the idea of walking outside alone suddenly felt worse than staying inside. So I shoved a chair under the bedroom doorknob and stayed awake. For a while, nothing happened. I sat in bed, scrolling my phone, just trying to stay calm. Eventually, I started convincing myself maybe the guy really had entered by mistake. Maybe he thought the place was empty. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe there was some weird misunderstanding. Then around 3:20, I heard footsteps again. Outside, circling the guest house. Slow, deliberate, gravel crunching beneath heavy shoes. My entire body went cold. I muted my phone and listened. The footsteps stopped near the bedroom window, then nothing. Absolute silence. I stared at the curtains. They were thin enough that I knew if somebody stood outside, I probably wouldn't see them clearly. That somehow made it worse. A full minute passed. Then there was a soft tap against the glass. Just one. I nearly dropped my phone. Another tap. Then a voice. The same man. Very quiet. "You shouldn't be in there." I didn't move. I didn't respond. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The man stayed outside the window for what felt like forever. No movement. No more tapping. Just presence. Then eventually the footsteps resumed, moving slowly away from the window. I waited maybe 30 seconds before finally standing up, enough to peek through the curtain. I only moved it a fraction of an inch. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed someone standing near the trees behind the guest house. Tall, motionless, facing the building. The darkness made it impossible to see details, but I could tell he was wearing some kind of jacket and possibly a hat. I remember the shape of his shoulders more than anything. Completely still, like he was waiting. Then my phone lit up. The sudden brightness startled me so badly, I almost yelled. Another text from the unknown number. "He knows you're awake." I immediately looked back outside. The figure was gone. I called the number. Straight to voicemail. No name. No greeting. Just silence. At that point, I seriously considered calling the police. I even had my thumb hovering over 911 for a second. But then I kept thinking about how ridiculous I'd sound, trying to explain it. There's a guy walking around outside my Airbnb. I could already imagine the dispatcher asking if he'd threatened me or tried to break in again. And technically, no, not really. But I kept thinking about how insane the situation would sound. A guy walking around outside an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere. No direct threats. No break-in currently happening. Just creepy behavior. I figured by the time anyone arrived, he'd already be gone. Still, I shoved my backpack against the bedroom window and kept listening. The next hour felt endless. Every tiny noise made me tense. Branches scraping outside. The refrigerator humming. Wind moving through the trees. At one point I heard something heavy drag across the porch. Then stop. Then nothing again. Around 4:30, exhaustion started catching up to me. I kept jerking awake every few minutes. At some point, I must have actually fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was sunlight coming through the curtains. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then everything came rushing back. I checked my phone immediately. No new texts, no missed calls. It was 7:18 a.m. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not normal morning silence. Dead silence. No birds. No cars. Nothing. I slowly removed the chair from the door and stepped into the living room. The front door was slightly open, maybe 2 inches. I know for a fact. I locked it before falling asleep. My stomach dropped immediately. I checked outside. No one there, but something had been left on the porch. An old ceramic mug, white with faded blue flowers, half full of black coffee, steam no longer rising, just sitting there beside the door. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to process what I was looking at. The mug looked old, not disposable, not something random, like it belonged in the house. That bothered me more than if it had been some threatening note. It felt personal, intentional. I went back inside, I grabbed my keys, and decided I was leaving immediately. But before I left, I checked the bathroom. That's where I found the blood. It wasn't a huge amount, just small dark smears near the sink, and several droplets on the floor, fresh enough that they hadn't fully dried. I remember standing there, staring at them, spread through my chest, because I knew they weren't there before. I would have noticed. I took pictures immediately. Then I noticed something else. The medicine cabinet was open. Inside was an old razor, one of those classic metal shaving razors. The sink itself had faint pink streaks, like someone had rinsed something quickly. I backed out of the bathroom and left. The entire drive away from that property felt unreal. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me. Nothing. Eventually I stopped at a diner near the highway and called the host again. This time she sounded fully awake. I told her about the blood, about the coffee mug. She went quiet. Then she asked me to send the photos. A few minutes later, she called back. sounding genuinely shaken. She said the mug belonged to the original owner. Apparently it had been part of a boxed set stored somewhere in the sheds behind the property. I asked if she'd contacted the son. She said she still couldn't reach anyone. Then she asked me something strange. She asked whether the man had seemed confused, not angry, not aggressive. Confused. I told her honestly. I didn't know. I barely saw him. She explained that, according to neighbors, the old owner had become increasingly unstable before leaving the property, wandering around at night, forgetting where he was, claiming strangers were staying in his house. I asked if the man I saw could have been the old owner himself. She said that wasn't possible. He died several months earlier. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it somehow made things worse, because if that wasn't him, then who was walking around the property at 3 a.m, acting like I didn't belong there? The rest of that day, I kept trying to rationalize everything. That's what your brain does after something like that. It keeps trying to force normal explanations onto things because the alternative feels worse. Maybe it really was the son. Maybe he still had keys. Maybe the coffee mug was his. Maybe the blood came from shaving. Every explanation almost worked, but not completely. There were too many details. That didn't fit. The texts, the way he stood outside the window, the sentence he said, "You shouldn't be in there," not "get out," not "who are you," just that, like he genuinely believed I was occupying somebody else's place. I finished the job in Holbrook and tried to forget about the whole thing. For a while, I mostly succeeded. Then about a month later, I got another text from the same unknown number. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. Did he come back? I stared at it for a long time. I eventually replied, asking who this was. No response. I called the number again. Disconnected. That should have been the end of it. Except a few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back to the Airbnb listing. It was gone, completely removed. No reviews, no profile, nothing. I actually searched the property address online. Eventually, I found a local forum thread discussing the place. Most of it was vague neighborhood gossip, but one comment stood out. Someone mentioned police being called to the property twice because guests reported someone entering the rental at night. No details, no names, just that. I remember feeling sick reading it because suddenly it wasn't just my experience anymore. Apparently other people had dealt with something similar. I tried contacting the host through Airbnb one last time. Then last winter, that was about a year ago, the account no longer existed. I was driving through Arizona again for another job. Different town, different route. I stopped at a gas station late at night, and while I was inside, grabbing coffee, I noticed an older man near the window, staring at me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then I saw his face. I swear to God, he looked almost identical to the man in the old photograph, hanging inside the guest house. Same narrow face, same posture, even the same dark jacket. He looked older than the photo, obviously, but close enough that my stomach immediately tightened. I kept trying to tell myself it was coincidence. The guy noticed me looking at him. Then he smiled, not friendly, just faintly, like recognition. I left the store immediately. By the time I looked back through the window, from outside, he was gone. No vehicle, no sign of him anywhere. I sat in my car for several minutes, debating whether I was losing my mind. I think part of me still believes it wasn't actually the same person. Memory does weird things. After traumatic experiences, you start connecting unrelated details, seeing patterns where there aren't any. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I think about that Airbnb again, about the footsteps outside the window, about waking up to the front door standing open, and about those texts, because I still have screenshots of them saved on an old phone. The number itself is dead now, but the messages are still there, especially the last one, the one that came months later. Did he come back? I've never been able to figure out what that actually meant. Who was warning me? Who entered the guest house that night? And why did it feel less like someone trying to scare me and more like someone trying to reclaim something they still believed belonged to them? There's one final detail I usually leave out because it sounds too strange, but it's true. A few days after the gas station incident, I found something in my trunk, an old ceramic mug, white, blue flowers, exactly like the one left outside the Airbnb. I threw it away at the next rest stop without touching it for more than a second. But sometimes I still wonder how long it had been there and whether it was already in my car before I ever noticed it. I don't stay in remote Airbnbs anymore, especially not after midnight. And if I ever hear someone quietly trying a locked bedroom door again, I honestly don't think I'll wait around to find out who's on the other side.